Evan walked slowly across the silent desert village, the wind pushing soft waves of sand around the broken houses. He had been traveling alone for many days, and he expected this place to be empty like the other ruins on this moon. But as he stepped closer to a collapsed stone wall, he heard something that made him stop. It was the sound of someone breathing fast, someone trying not to cry. Evan followed the sound and saw two small shapes hiding behind the wall, covered in dust from head to toe. The older girl, maybe 16, quickly stood up when she saw him. Her eyes were wide with fear, her breath shaking. She stepped in front of the younger girl and raised her hands like she was protecting a treasure. Evan lifted his palms to show he meant no harm, but before he could say a single word, the older girl suddenly dropped to her knees in the sand. Her voice broke as she said the words Evan never expected to hear. "Human. Please don't take my sister. Take me instead." Evan froze, shocked. He had never threatened them. He had not even spoken. But the girl was crying, begging like she believed he was here to steal them. The little one hid behind her, hugging her waist tightly, her small body trembling as she whispered something Evan couldn't hear. It felt like both sisters were expecting pain at any moment. Evan slowly crouched down, trying to look less frightening. He spoke softly, telling them he was not there to hurt them. But the older girl did not believe him. She bowed her head in the dust, her hands shaking and her voice cracking. "Please, take me. Leave her. She is too small." She pushed her sister behind her, as if she expected Evan to attack any second. The younger girl cried silently, her tears making thin lines on her dusty cheeks. Evan's heart squeezed painfully. These children were terrified, and he understood that their fear did not come from him. Something terrible had happened before he arrived, something that had broken their trust in everyone. He tried again, gently saying, "I am not like the men you ran from." But the girl whispered, "Humans always come for us." Her belief was so strong, so full of fear, that Evan felt her pain like a punch. Before he could speak again, a low engine roar echoed across the desert. The older girl flinched so hard she almost fell. She grabbed the younger girl and whispered, "They found us. They are coming." Her voice was full of terror. The little girl hugged her tightly, shaking like a leaf. Evan stood up instantly, scanning the horizon. 3 dust clouds were rising from the dunes, moving fast toward them. Raiders, hunters, abductors, whoever they were close. The older girl pushed the little one toward Evan and whispered with tears in her voice, "Please take my sister and run. Please save her. I can distract them." Evan looked at her with disbelief. She was willing to sacrifice herself without hesitation. Just to save her sister, he asked. "Why would you give up your life?" She didn't even think before answering. "She is all I have left." Her voice cracked again. "They can take me, but they cannot take her again." The word "again" hit Evan hard. Something terrible had already been done to them, something no child should ever face. He clenched his fists as anger boiled quietly inside him. The engines grew louder, metal grinding against the dry wind. Evan now had only seconds. He could leave the sisters behind and walk away, avoiding danger. Or he could step into a fight that wasn't his. But the way the older girl knelt in the sand, the way the younger girl cried against her back, made the choice clear in his heart. Evan walked forward and stood between the girls and the approaching raiders. The older sister looked up at him in confusion. "Why are you staying?" she whispered. Evan didn't turn around, didn't move, didn't hesitate. His voice was quiet but full of firm promise as he said, "Because nobody is taking either of you. Not while I'm here." The raiders' engines roared louder, the ground trembling under their skimmers as they closed in. The sisters clung to each other. Watching the lone human standing against the wind, Evan braced himself, his eyes locked on the horizon, ready to face whatever came out of the dust. The first shadow appeared through the sandstorm, then another, then the whole group. But Evan did not step back. He just whispered one last sentence under his breath, a promise to the terrified girls behind him. "I'll protect you both." The sound of the engines grew louder, shaking the dry ground under Evan's boots. Dust rose like a brown wall in front of them as the raiders' skimmers rushed toward the ruined village. The two alien sisters clung to each other, fear tightening their small bodies. The older girl, Leary, whispered, "They are coming for us," while the younger one, Mila, hid her face in her sister's shoulder. Evan stood tall in front of them, his shoulders firm, his eyes locked on the approaching silhouettes. He felt the girls trembling behind him, and it made him even more determined not to move. He didn't know these children, he didn't know their story, but he knew one thing clearly: they had been running for far too long. And today, they would not run anymore. Not alone. Not without someone standing up for them. The first skimmer slid to a stop only a few meters from Evan. The engines hissed, and the sand settled enough to reveal the raiders. They were tall, armored aliens with dark scales and sharp eyes. Each carried a weapon, blasters, blades, and shock rods. Their leader, a broad-shouldered hunter with a metal mask covering half his face, stepped forward. He looked at Evan with mocking amusement. "A human," he growled. "Move aside, Fleshskin. These girls belong to us." Leary gasped softly and tightened her hold on Mila. Evan's jaw tensed. He raised his hand slightly, not in surrender but in warning. "They don't belong to anyone," he said calmly. His voice was steady, but inside he was preparing himself for a fight he knew was unavoidable. The hunters laughed, the sound echoing across the open sand. "You think you can protect them?" one of them sneered. "Humans are weak." But Evan didn't answer. He kept his body still, waiting, watching, measuring every angle, every weapon, every movement. Mila peeked from behind Leary, her wide eyes filled with confusion. She whispered, "Why is he not running?" Leary whispered back, "I don't know." "Humans never stay." The leader raised his shock rod, pointing it at Evan. "Move or die," he said. Evan did not move. His heartbeat slowed. His breath grew controlled, his mind sharpened. He had been in fights before, many times, but this one felt different. This time, 2 lives depended on him. 2 small lives that had already suffered too much. The raider leader fired a warning shot. A bright blue bolt shot into the sand just inches from Evan's foot. The sand exploded upward, but Evan didn't flinch. He simply stepped forward, putting himself even more between the girls and the hunters. That single step made the sisters gasp and made the raiders stop laughing. "Last chance, human," the leader growled. "Move away." Evan looked straight into the raider's eyes and answered in a low voice, "No." The hunters exchanged glances. Then the leader signaled with his hand. 2 raiders rushed forward, their boots pounding the sand. They moved fast, but Evan moved faster, with a quick shift of his weight. He dodged the first strike, grabbing the raider's arm and flipping him over his shoulder. The alien hit the ground with a heavy crash, sending sand flying. The second raider swung a blade toward Evan's ribs, but Evan twisted sideways, the blade slicing through empty air. He grabbed a handful of sand and threw it into the raider's eyes, blinding him temporarily. Then he delivered a sharp strike to the raider's chest, sending him stumbling back with a grunt. Leary covered Mila's eyes as they watched, neither of them understanding how a lone human could move like this. Mila whispered shakily, Is he really human?" Leary couldn't answer. Her heart pounded too fast, too full of fear and hope mixed together. The rest of the raiders grew angry now. Their laughter disappeared, replaced by growls. The leader stepped forward again. "You think you can win," he spat. "We have numbers, weapons, strength." Evan didn't respond. His eyes scanned the environment, the broken walls, the fallen beams, the narrow spaces he could use. He had no weapon, but he had skill, speed, and something more dangerous: purpose. 2 more raiders attacked, working together. One aimed for Evan's head, the other for his legs. Evan ducked under the first swing, kicked out the second attacker's knee, and then rolled sideways to avoid a blaster shot. The energy bolt hit a broken pillar, blasting it into pieces. The explosion echoed across the ruins. Leary held Mila tightly, whispering prayers under her breath. The girls had seen many fights while running, but never had they seen someone stand for them like this. Evan kept moving, dodging, striking, defending. But the hunters were many, and more skimmers appeared on the horizon, dust trails rising like angry smoke. The leader finally stopped watching and pulled out a massive blade with glowing edges. "Enough," he roared. "You die now." He charged toward Evan with heavy thundering steps. Evan braced himself. Knowing this would be the hardest strike to counter, he did not step back, not even an inch. Behind him, Leary whispered a trembling plea. "Please, human, don't die." And Evan, hearing that small voice filled with fear, locked his jaw and made a silent promise to the sisters. A promise he was ready to fight for with everything he had. The leader's blade swung wide, sparks flying as it cut the air. But Evan moved at the last moment, turning the attack into something else entirely. The beginning of a fight that would change all of their lives. The raider leader swung his glowing blade with deadly force, the air cutting open with a sharp hiss. Evan stepped back just in time, the hot edge of the weapon passing so close that it burned a line through his jacket. The heat stung his skin, but he didn't stop. He planted his feet in the sand, breathing steadily as the leader roared and came at him again. Behind him, Leary pulled Mila farther behind the broken wall. Leary held her breath every time the blade flashed. She wanted to scream for Evan to run, but no sound came out. Mila clung to her tightly, whispering, "Please don't let him die." "Please." The raider leader charged again, his heavy footsteps sending sand flying. Evan ducked under the blade, grabbed the raider's wrist, and used the leader's own weight to flip him over his shoulder. The massive alien hit the ground with a loud thud, the sand shaking under the impact. But the leader sprang back up, angrier than before. His metal mask gleamed with reflected sunlight, his eyes burning with rage. "You fight well for a human," he growled, "but you cannot win." Evan didn't answer. He watched every movement, every shift of weight, every breath the leader took. He knew this fight was far from over, and he could not afford even a small mistake. The lives of the two sisters were behind him, depending on him, and that gave him strength he thought he had lost long ago. More raiders surrounded the ruins, their weapons drawn. The leader shouted, "Take the girls when I kill him." Leary gasped sharply, pushing Mila closer behind her body. Evan's eyes narrowed, his muscles tightened. His voice came out low and cold, "You're not touching them." The leader rushed at him once more, this time faster, more focused. Evan twisted sideways, letting the blade cut through empty air. Then he struck the leader's ribs with his elbow, followed by a quick kick to the knee. The raider grunted in pain and staggered, but managed to slash toward Evan's shoulder. The blade grazed him, ripping through his sleeve and leaving a burning cut on his arm. Blood dripped onto the sand, bright red against the golden ground. Leary cried out softly when she saw the blood. "He's hurt." Mila held her sister's hand tighter, tears filling her eyes. But Evan did not slow down. Pain sharpened him instead of weakening him. He used the broken pillars and fallen beams of the ruined village to his advantage, ducking behind them, using them as cover. Moving with careful steps, the raiders fired energy bolts, each blast hitting stone and sending pieces flying. The air grew heavy with dust, heat, and smoke. The leader swung again, breaking the cracked wall in half. Evan rolled under the falling stones and came up behind the leader. He grabbed the raider's arm and twisted it sharply. The leader roared in pain and dropped the blade. It sank halfway into the sand, glowing angrily. Seeing the blade fall, the other raiders panicked. They all rushed toward Evan at once. Their boots pounded like thunder, weapons raised. Evan backed up toward a narrow space between two collapsed houses. It forced the raiders to come at him one at a time instead of all together. He had chosen the ground carefully, using the ruins to even the fight. The first raider lunged with a shock rod. Evan dodged and swept the raider's legs out from under him. The second raider jumped in swinging a blade. Evan blocked it with his forearm, ignoring the sting, and elbowed the raider in the jaw, sending him stumbling. A third raider fired a blaster bolt. Evan ducked behind a half-broken pillar. The bolt exploded against the stone, sending shards into the air. A piece cut Evan's cheek, but he didn't stop. He grabbed the fallen metal beam and swung it with force, knocking the blaster out of the raider's hand. Leary watched with wide, terrified eyes. She could not understand how one human was standing against so many. Mila whispered, Why is he helping us? Leary whispered back, her voice breaking. I don't know. But he is. The leader finally got back to his feet, grabbing his blade again, his anger reaching a dangerous peak. Enough, he roared. I will cut you down. He charged with blinding speed for someone his size. Evan knew this strike would be the strongest one yet. He stepped aside, but the leader adjusted mid-swing. The blade slashed across Evan's ribs, tearing through his shirt and skin. Evan stumbled, grabbing the wall for support. The pain shot through him like fire. Leary cried out. No, Mila started sobbing, her small hands shaking violently. The leader raised the blade again, ready to finish the human who dared to challenge him. But Evan pushed off the wall, ignoring the pain. He grabbed the broken pipe from the ground and swung it upward with all his strength. The pipe hit the leader's jaw, the metal mask cracking loudly. The leader dropped to one knee, stunned. Evan didn't wait. He struck again, and the mask split in half. Falling into the sand, the leader fell back, gasping. The other raiders hesitated, fear replacing their confidence. Evan stepped toward them, blood running down his arm and side. His voice was cold and steady when he said, "Leave." The raiders looked at each other, then at their fallen leader. Finally, they scrambled onto their skimmers and sped away, leaving the ruins in silence again. Evan dropped the pipe and breathed heavily, his vision blurred from blood loss and exhaustion. Behind him, Mila ran out first, tears streaming. Leary followed, falling to her knees beside him. She whispered, her voice shaking, "Why did you stay? Why did you fight for us?" Evan looked at the sisters, the desert wind brushing across his wounded face, and he answered quietly, "Because you shouldn't have to fight alone." The desert wind moved softly through the broken village, carrying the smell of hot sand and burnt metal. Evan leaned against a shattered wall, breathing hard. His wounds throbbed with sharp heat, and every breath made the cut on his ribs sting. But when he looked at the two sisters running toward him, fear still in their eyes, he forced himself to stand straighter. He didn't want them to see how badly he was hurting. Mila reached him first, her small hands shaking as she touched the blood on his arm. "You're hurt," she whispered in a trembling voice. Leary arrived a moment later, kneeling in front of him. Her dusty clothes were torn, and her cheeks were wet from crying. She looked at Evan as if she didn't understand what kind of person he was. "You saved us," she said softly. "Why would a human do that?" Evan tried to give her a small smile, even though pain tightened his chest. "Because I chose to," he said. His voice was low, calm. But Leary looked away, still confused, still scared, still trying to understand the world around her. Mila held onto his sleeve, refusing to let go, as if she feared he might disappear if she blinked. Evan knelt down slowly so he could speak to them at their level. "Who are those men?" he asked gently. "Why are they hunting you?" Leary's shoulders stiffened. Mila looked at the ground, and suddenly the silence became heavy. Evan knew then that whatever they were hiding was painful, maybe even dangerous. Finally Leary spoke, her voice shaking. "They took us from our colony," she said. "They burned everything. They killed everyone." "They were looking for Mila." Evan frowned, confused. "For Mila?" he asked. Leary hesitated before nodding. "Mila is different," she whispered. "She has something inside her, something rare. Something our people call the inner glow." Mila hid her face behind Leary's arm, embarrassed or scared. Evan touched Mila's shoulder gently. "Different doesn't mean bad," he said. Mila didn't look up, but her shaking slowed a little. Leary continued speaking, her words trembling like broken pieces. "The raiders sell gifted children. They make them work. Or they sell them to scientists. Or worse." Her voice cracked and she covered her mouth with her hand, trying not to cry again. Evan felt his stomach twist. The thought of Mila being used like that made anger burn hot inside him. He kept his voice steady as he asked, "How long have you been running?" 3 moons, Leary whispered. "We hide in ruins. We steal food. We sleep under sand. We lost our parents, everyone. We only had each other." Mila finally lifted her head, her eyes red. "Leary protects me," she said. "Always." Leary squeezed her little sister's hand, her voice soft but heavy with guilt. I couldn't protect her from the raiders before. They took her once. They hurt her. Mila's body tensed, her breath shaking. Evan felt something inside him break silently. He placed his hand gently on Mila's small back. "Nobody will take you again," he said firmly. Mila looked at him with wide eyes, full of fear and hope mixed together like fragile glass. Evan stood up slowly, fighting the dizziness in his head. "We can't stay here," he said. "More raiders will come," Leary nodded, wiping her tears. "We know," she whispered. "They always come." Evan looked around the ruined village, the burned houses, the empty streets, the silent shadows. This was a place where life had ended, not where safety could begin. Evan walked toward the raiders' abandoned skimmers. Checking if one still worked, he found a smaller one with a cracked engine but functional controls. He turned back toward the sisters. "We're leaving," he told them. Mila's eyes widened. To where? Evan didn't have the answer, but he gave the only one that mattered right now. Somewhere safer than here. Leary helped Mila climb onto the skimmer, then sat behind her, holding her protectively. Evan climbed into the front, wincing as his cuts pulled painfully. Mila whispered, "You're hurt. You shouldn't drive." Evan gave her a tiny smile. "I've driven while hurt before," he said. He started the engine, and the skimmer hummed weakly but steadily. The wind pressed against them as they moved away from the ruins. Heading into the open desert, the sun dipped lower, turning the dunes gold and red. For a moment, it looked peaceful, almost beautiful, but Leary kept looking back, her fingers tightening on Mila's shoulders. "They will follow us," she whispered. "They always follow." Evan heard the fear in her voice. He didn't turn around, but he answered in a voice strong enough for both sisters. "Let them follow," he said. "I'm not letting them take you ever again." Mila leaned her head against Leary's arm, watching the sand fly behind them like fading shadows. For the first time in many moons, the little girl whispered words she had forgotten how to say. "Leary." "Are we safe now?" Leary hugged her closer, tears filling her eyes as she whispered back, Maybe with him." "We finally are." Evan's grip tightened on the controls, because far behind them, rising like dark storms on the horizon, he saw fresh dust clouds, more skimmers heading their way. The chase was not over, and the danger was growing. But for the first time, Evan was not running alone, and neither were the sisters. The skimmer shook as Evan pushed it harder across the spreading desert. The cracked engine rattled like it might fall apart at any moment, but it kept moving, sending long trails of sand behind them. Leary held Mila tightly, her arms wrapped around her little sister's small body. Mila pressed her face into Leary's chest, trying not to cry. The wind was strong, dry, and sharp, and it pulled at their hair and clothes as the skimmer cut through the dunes. Evan kept his eyes focused on the horizon ahead, but the mirror on the side showed the thing he feared, dust clouds growing, rising higher, spreading wider, more raiders, many more than before. They were coming fast, faster than Evan had hoped. The old skimmer struggled, coughing like a sick animal, but Evan refused to slow down. He pushed the controls forward again, even though sparks shot up from the engine. Leary looked over her shoulder and her voice cracked. "They're getting closer." Evan didn't turn around, but his grip tightened on the controls. "Hold on," he said. The sisters leaned lower against the metal seat as the wind whipped around them. Mila trembled with each bump. "Why won't they stop chasing us?" she whispered. Leary kissed her forehead. "They want you," she said softly. "Because they know you're special." Mila squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she was not special at all. The raiders' skimmers moved like dark insects across the desert, spreading into a wide formation. The engines roared louder, echoing across the empty land. Evan could almost feel the vibrations trembling through the sand beneath the skimmer. He had to think fast. He knew the desert, its cliffs, its hidden dips, its broken ruins scattered across the land, and he also knew that these hunters were trained but arrogant. They expected a straight chase, but Evan didn't plan to give them one. Ahead, the ground dipped into a dry riverbed, filled with jagged rocks and sudden drops. The old skimmer barely had the strength to survive such a path, but the enemy skimmers behind them were heavier and faster. Evan turned sharply toward the riverbed. Leary gasped, gripping the seat as the skimmer bounced violently. Mila screamed as the skimmer dropped into the rocky path with a hard jolt. Evan kept it steady, controlling every dip and rise, his jaw tight with focus. Behind them, the raiders tried to follow, but their speed worked against them. One skimmer hit a rock and flipped, rolling into the sand. Another slammed into a narrow bend and exploded into sparks. Leary watched with wide eyes. "You knew they would crash," she whispered. Evan nodded once. "Arrogant hunters make mistakes," he said. "We just need to stay ahead long enough." But the victory didn't last long. More raiders appeared from the right, cutting across the dunes with perfect formation. They were smarter, more coordinated, and they were pushing to block Evan's path. Evan cursed under his breath. Mila grabbed his arm, her voice shaking. "Are we going to die?" Evan looked at her for a second, his eyes steady. "Not today," he said. "I promise." He turned the skimmer sharply, heading toward a tall ridge of sand cliffs. The desert wind howled around them as the skimmer climbed the unstable slope. The engine whined in protest, smoke rising from under the metal plates. Leary squeezed her eyes shut as they neared the top. "We won't make it," she whispered. Evan pushed harder, the skimmer shaking violently. The engine sputtered, then screamed, and somehow they reached the top of the ridge. But on the other side was a steep drop into an open basin of sand. Evan didn't hesitate. He drove straight over the edge. The skimmer fell for a moment. Mila screamed. Leary grabbed her tightly, and Evan held the controls steady as the skimmer slammed into the basin floor, sending a cloud of sand exploding upward. The skimmer landed hard, its left side scraping against the sand, but it kept moving, sliding across the basin until the engine caught again. The raiders reached the top seconds later, but none dared to take the same jump. They spread along the ridge instead, firing bolts down toward Evan. The sand exploded around them, bright blue flashes lighting up the basin. Evan swerved left and right, avoiding each blast by inches. Mila cried out every time a bolt hit close enough to shake the skimmer. Then, through the thick dust, something massive appeared ahead. A gigantic armored crawler, twice the size of a house, rolled slowly across their path, its metal wheels crushing the ground beneath them. Its shadow fell over the basin like a falling night. Leary's breath caught in her throat. "We're trapped," she whispered. Evan's eyes narrowed. He slowed the skimmer, turning it sideways to avoid crashing into the crawler. The crawler's front lights clicked on, shining brightly on them, revealing dozens of armed raiders on top. Their weapons pointed down at the human and the two sisters. Mila's small hand reached for Evan's sleeve. "I'm scared," she whispered. Evan placed his hand over hers, his voice steady even as danger closed around them. "Stay close," he said softly. "I'm not letting anyone take you." The raiders surrounded them from all sides, engines roaring, weapons glowing, dust rising like angry smoke. Evan stood slowly, the sisters behind him. His voice was quiet, almost calm, but filled with unshakable resolve. "This isn't over," he said. The final battle for the sisters' freedom was about to begin. The basin fell silent except for the heavy rumble of the giant armored crawler. Evan stood in front of the sisters, his body tense, his breath steady but heavy with pain. Dozens of raiders aimed their glowing weapons at him, forming a circle that closed tighter and tighter. The sun hung low above the dunes, turning the sand red like blood. Mila grabbed the back of Evan's shirt, her voice trembling. "They're going to take us again," she whispered. Evan shook his head slowly. "Not while I'm here," he said. The crawler's door slammed open, and the raider commander stepped out. He was taller than any of the others, his armor black and heavy, his eyes burning like embers. His voice echoed across the basin. "Human, you caused us great trouble," he said. "Give us the girls, and we may let you die quickly." Mila whimpered, hiding behind Leary. Leary stepped slightly forward, pulling Mila with her, her voice cracking. "Take me instead," she said suddenly. "Take me. But let my sister go." The raiders laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Evan turned his head toward Leary, shocked. "No," he said firmly. "Don't say that." But Leary shook her head, tears running down her dusty cheeks. "It's the only way," she whispered. They want Mila. They always wanted her, if they take me. Maybe she has a chance. Mila grabbed her sister's arm with both hands, shaking her head desperately. No, Leary. No, please, she cried. The commander smirked. How touching, he said. But we will take both. Leary's face went pale. Mila choked on a sob. Evan stepped in front of them again, blocking them with his entire body. The commander narrowed his eyes. You are bleeding. Tired. Outnumbered, he said. Why stand for children that are not yours? Evan looked at the sisters, then back at the commander. His voice was quiet but sharp. Because someone should, he said. And you won't go through me. With a loud command, the raiders tightened their circle. Weapons rising higher, Leary grabbed Evan's arm. Please run, she whispered. Please take Mila and run. I will slow them down. Evan shook his head. I'm not abandoning either of you, he said, his voice steady even as pain burned through his ribs. The commander raised his hand, signaling the raiders to fire. Mila screamed, burying her face against Leary. But before the weapons went off, Evan reached under his torn jacket and pulled out a small metallic device, worn and scratched. The commander's eyes widened. He has a beacon, he snarled. Destroy it. But Evan pressed the activation switch before anyone could move. A sharp, piercing sound echoed through the air, followed by a burst of blue light erupting around Evan and the sisters. The raiders stumbled back, shielding their eyes. The air crackled as a protective energy dome formed around the three of them. Mila gasped. What is that? She whispered. Evan kept his eyes on the raiders. Something I hoped I'd never use again, he said. The commander stepped forward, slamming his fist against the glowing barrier. Sparks exploded, but the barrier held strong. Evan's voice softened as he looked back at the sisters. This dome won't last long, he said. Maybe a minute. Maybe less. Leary's voice shook. What do we do? Evan watched the raiders spreading out, preparing heavier weapons. When it drops, I'll distract them, he said. You two run toward the dunes. Don't look back. Mila's lip trembled. But you'll die, she whispered. Evan touched her head gently. I've survived worse, he said, and you matter more. Leary grabbed his wounded arm, her voice firm but filled with fear. No, she said. You can't die for us. Evan looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes, an old pain, a memory he carried alone. I couldn't save people before, he said softly. But I can save you. Leary's breath hitched, her tears falling faster. Outside the dome, the commander shouted, Bring the heavy cannon. Raiders hauled a large blaster into position, aiming it directly at Evan. Mila hugged Leary tightly, her whole body shaking. I don't want him to die, she cried. Leary held her close, whispering, I know. I know. The cannon fired, slamming into the barrier with a roaring blast. The entire dome shook violently, cracks of blue light racing across its surface. Evan steadied himself, preparing for the moment it would break. Another blast hit. Then another. The dome shimmered, weakened, flickering like a dying flame. Leary grabbed Mila's hand, ready to run, ready to obey Evan's desperate plan. But Mila suddenly broke free and stood in front of Evan, her small body trembling. Don't do this, she begged. Don't die for us. Evan knelt down, ignoring the pain, and placed both hands gently on her shoulders. I'm not dying, he whispered. I'm protecting you. Mila sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck, and he held her tightly for a moment. Then the barrier shattered with a deafening crack. Blue shards of light burst outward like broken glass. The raiders charged forward immediately, weapons raised. The commander roared. Take them. Evan stood, pushing Mila gently behind him. His voice came out steady, strong, unbroken, even with death rushing toward them. You're not taking anyone, he said, and with nothing left to lose. Wounded, exhausted, and outnumbered, Evan charged forward into the swarm of raiders. Leary screamed his name. Mila cried out in terror, and the desert filled with the sound of battle as the fight for the sisters' freedom began.